Hello, YouTubers out there. This is Jerry Saravia at the movies. So today I want to talk about one of the greatest films I've ever seen, and probably the best film ever made about a lawyer. Of course, it's just my opinion. This is also the very best film I've ever seen Paul Newman in, and the very best film by director Sidney Lumet. So let's get right to it. The Verdict. And today, December 8th, is the 40th anniversary of this picture, which came out in 1982 on December 8th. The Verdict is one of those movies that, when you're young, so I think at the time, I think I was about 10 or 11 years old. I can't say I had the greatest interest in it, but it was one of those films that was on, and I couldn't help myself but watch. It's a very watchable film. And having seen it a few times since in my life, much later on, actually, it was like sort of in the back of my mind. Like I always knew I liked it, but once you get older, you can appreciate some of the subtleties and nuances in this film, as is true of any film, particularly about somebody who is, I think roughly the character might be in his 50s or later. Anyway, Paul Newman plays a Boston lawyer named Frank Galvin, and he's an ambulance chaser. He goes to all these funeral homes looking for, first of all, he circles obits for people that have already passed, and is hoping that by giving his card, depending on the situation of the deceased, that he can maybe make a few bucks. He hadn't had a court case in some time. Certainly he hadn't been in trial for a long time. He had issues in the past as a lawyer with his previous practice, and they involved possibly jury tampering. So Jack Warden plays his friend, who Jack Warden is magnificent, shows so much sympathy towards his friend Frank. Frank is an alcoholic, and should establish that right away. His pastime is going to his favorite bar, playing the pinball machine, not quite scoring what he hopes to score, putting an egg in his beer, and that's how he starts his day. But there is a court case through the archdiocese, and it involves a woman. This is the case that Jack Warden brings to Frank. It involves a woman who's comatose and apparently was given the wrong anesthetic. And it's a little complex, but basically what happened was she wasn't supposed to eat anything 1 hour prior to the to receiving the anesthetic, which turned out to be the wrong one anyway. And because of that, the paperwork with the doctor seems to say that it was 9 hours. So there is a whole thing going on here. And really all Jack Warden is doing is giving this case to Frank and basically saying it's a buyout. They want to settle. They don't want to take this to court, to trial or anything. The woman's sister and her husband, they just want the money and take off to California, and enough is enough. It's been going on for too long. Not very clear what's going to happen to the comatose woman. I don't know if it was implied, and I'm still not sure watching the film. It's based on a book, which I've never read. Someday I would like to read it, maybe, because I really like the story. Whether they're going to pull the plug on this comatose woman or not, which is likely, I don't know. It's not a plot hole. It's just sort of, it's not exactly implied either, to the best of my knowledge of the film, which I've seen several times. But nonetheless, it's an easy case for Frank. He stands to get over $25,000 or something like that, a third of what the payout is. But then Frank, in a very stunning scene, visits the comatose woman, takes a couple of Polaroid shots just to establish that he's seen the woman. He knows she's comatose. This is, just to certify that he's going to get the money. And he sits there and he looks at the two Polaroids, and something happens to him. And really what he wants to do is take this case to trial, because there was an error, and another doctor tells him that there was an error, that these people killed her, and they're trying to cover it up. So that reignites Frank Galvin. Now, this type of story is nothing new. It's about the underdog. It's about a guy who really could rise from his alcoholic ashes and regain maybe his former glory. And that is really why the film works so well. It's that stunning transformation. It's very subtle, because anyone else making this movie, perhaps, and it's a script by David Mamet, by the way, which went through some other script revisions, but this is the original script that Sidney Lumet chose to film, which was a little darker and a little more unforgiving in certain scenes, which I'll get to in a second. But the interesting thing is that if somebody did this story today, they probably wouldn't show the character drinking as much, even when he's trying to rise above where he has been. And he continues to drink. And at the end, he's just having a cup of coffee and he lets go of the past, presumably. And that I liked a lot. It's, you know, it's funny how when you do a redemption story, you can redeem the soul of the character, but you don't have to redeem everything about them. In other words, he might still want to have a drink at his favorite bar at some point. It's not unlikely. He just may not drink nearly as much. So there's also that. But more importantly, he knows that he feels justice is possible. And this is what he believes in. And there's a scene with Charlotte Rampling, who plays, I have to go back and check because, of course, I forget. Her name was Laura. I know that. Yeah, Laura. And she is very quietly effective, Charlotte Rampling, as this sort of a femme fatale of sorts. You know, this is not really a film noir story, but she has that allure a little bit. She's seductive. She's at the bar, and it's not by sheer accident. Because apparently, well, I don't want to give too much away. I would say watch the movie for sure, but let's just say she's not necessarily 100% with Frank, even though they have this brief romance. When he finds out what happens, there's a moment of really startling physical violence, and I'll leave it at that. But when he explains about justice, I thought it was quite interesting, because he still believes that justice can be had, because the jury do believe in it. They do believe in some sort of justice. And, you know, it's funny, maybe in those days, in the early 1980s, there was still a sense that maybe the little guy, meaning him, of course, could triumph over somebody who's a wealthy lawyer and has their own practice, which, of course, would be Ed Concannon, who is the defending attorney for the Archdiocese, who owns the hospital where this woman was found comatose. And he's played by the really great James Mason. It's funny, I think there's only one bad performance that I've seen James Mason ever give, and it was just too over the top. It was in a Charles Bronson film called, I think it's called Cold Sweat. But generally speaking, James Mason is a fantastic actor. I mean, even in that, I still liked watching him. His voice, it's amazing. He's an amazing actor. He was Oscar nominated for this, didn't win. Paul Newman was also Oscar nominated. I remember at the time they thought if Paul Newman is not winning for this, and that year it was Ben Kingsley for Gandhi for Best Actor, it was never going to happen. And ironically, it happened when he actually ended up playing a character he played previously, Fast Eddie Felsen, in The Color of Money, which was a sequel to the 1961 film The Hustler. So that's when Newman finally won an Oscar. But this is his best performance. So we believe in him. That's the thing about Frank, is that it reignites something in him. He wants to believe in the law, and that there can be justice, and that even if justice is blind, he's not. And I think that's what I take away from the film. Everyone is just fantastic in this film. Sidney Lumet does this thing where it's I've seen it in many other films, but in here it's quite striking and rather subtle. You know, he's always been a subtle director in terms of lighting schemes, especially. He believes in injecting lighting schemes that color the scenes gradually, and the movie and the narrative based on whatever the story is, so that you don't quite see what it is he's doing. And the lighting scheme is, but not definitively, Caravaggio type. And Caravaggio was a type of painter who would have one strong source of light come in from either the left or the right that would light the room. And there's a lot of that in this film. There's a lot of shadows in this picture too, in particular with Paul Newman and his some amazing close-ups, which are not frequent in the movie, but when they do happen, you can really see the lighting. But this is really Sidney Lumet at his very best, who's done some great films. This, along with Prince of the City, Network, which is probably the second best film he ever made. Um, well, if none of you know Sidney Lumet, particularly check out his New York police movies, Serpico being the first one that I can think of. Later on, he even did Night Falls on Manhattan, which was a good movie. Not a great one, but certainly good. But The Verdict is a Boston story. It's not New York, although it even looks like New York a little bit. In some strange way, I always thought it was New York and didn't realize. But the film has just amazing performances. Again, I mean, you could sort of see where it's going, but it's not necessarily knowing that it's where it's going, but how it's going to get there. And that makes all the difference. It's just a stunning picture from first frame to last. Every performance is fantastic. It's a very watchable film. You can watch it over and over again. It's one of those films that, even though there's a lot of language in particular about the legal machinations of this case, or certainly some of the difficulties in understanding all the little nuances, how he can gather all this stuff. At the end of the day, what's interesting about this movie is that even if you didn't have the court case, it's still a stunning character study. And that's what I love about it. It could easily just be about Frank Galvin, which it is, without the court case. The court case is just the cherry on top. It's just an amazing film. I love it. For those of you who like to catch cameos, there are 2 cameos towards the very end of the film in the courtroom, where we see the people sitting in the courtroom. Bruce Willis with a lot of hair, and I didn't know this before, but Tobin Bell. I think it's during the summation when Paul Newman or Frank Galvin gives a summation of the case, and but just a perfect film. I mean, one of the very few perfect films I've ever seen. I don't know how else to put it. It's, I guess you never really imagine a courtroom drama could be this electrifying, but this film really is. And it's because of Frank Galvin, because of Paul Newman's performance, Sidney Lumet's astute direction, the lighting in particular, just everything about it is so beautifully layered. I can't say enough good things about this movie. So watch The Verdict if you've never seen it. I think it's, if you don't buy the DVD, and you should, if you love the movie, buy the DVD or the Blu-ray, but definitely rent it. It's worth seeing. I believe it's on Amazon and other streaming services, but this is one of those films I wish I had seen in a theater. I never did. But anyway, The Verdict, please watch. I did get 4 new subscribers recently, so that's good news. I would like to someday reach 10,000, but this channel maybe has limited appeal because, first of all, I have to say I got 1 dislike based on my Indiana Jones trailer thoughts video recently, because I don't do trailer reactions. First of all, I don't have the tech here for that, and I don't think it's really that interesting to watch somebody watching a trailer and see how they react. I like seeing other people do that, particularly something I like, but I don't do that. I just discuss what I've seen. So anyway, but thanks to all the new subscribers, and hopefully I get more. I would love to get more, but this channel, is just I'm not really like some of the other film critics. I really try to. I'm perhaps a little more meditative, perhaps a little more leisurely in how I discuss things, but I feel that that's just how I do it. So I can't go at any faster pace than I am right now. So that's all I got to say about this, and watch The Verdict, and also check out some of Sidney Lumet's other films, which there are various films, including The Wiz. Sidney Lumet directed that one with Diana Ross and Richard Pryor, based, of course, on The Wizard of Oz. He's done quite a variety. Running on Empty is another great film with River Phoenix and Judd Hirsch, a family that's on the run. I know there are a lot of other films. The one I need to check out, which I still have on disc and I haven't actually watched it yet. I think it's his last official film. It was Before the Devil Knows You Did It or something like that, with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Ethan Hawke. That's going to be certainly one of the next ones I will see. But definitely, tell me your thoughts on The Verdict, and if you agree. I'm sure some people think Paul Newman was even better in other films, but this was him at his very best. I mean, this is just an amazing picture. Again, can't say enough great things about it. So lend me your thoughts. Tell me what you think about The Verdict, if you agree and or disagree. That's okay, too. We can't all agree on the same things. And this is Jerry Saravia at the Movies, signing off.